Hi everybody, I'm Girl Writes What, and I was having a conversation with a friend a week or two ago about benevolent sexism against women. He was asking me if I thought it was actually a thing, and after a lot of discussion back and forth with him, I kind of came to the conclusion that it's the only thing. That benevolent sexism against women is the primary, maybe even the only form of sexism against women. In other words, it's my belief that all sexism against women originates as a benevolent force based on one of society's and our biology's principal concerns, that women should be provisioned and protected. This benevolent force can, of course, have negative consequences for a lot of women. And those consequences are what we generally define as hostile sexism. Now, to explain things a little further, in my last video, I mentioned that I thought that all men throughout history have really been exactly what women wanted and needed. And I really kind of want to explain my reasoning a little bit further with that. A recent study by a professor of ecology and evolutionary biology at the University of Tennessee demonstrated by a mathematical model how our early hominid ancestors made the leap from the tournament model of social organization to a mostly monogamous model that is in many ways unique among animal species. This model was based on what would be described then as subordinate males cheating the existing system of male dominance, and females' reproductive choices over time reinforcing that cheating. To clarify a little further, the tournament model of social organization is one where the majority of the offspring are sired by about 5% of the males. Mountain gorillas are a tournament species. The dominant male has a harem of females. He sires all the offspring, usually passes leadership to a son or successor when he dies. However, most groups have only a single adult male. If another larger, stronger male comes along and kills or ousts him, with very few exceptions, all the existing juveniles in that group will be killed. The females then all go into heat, and the whole thing starts all over again. Now, baboons are another tournament species. They live in troops that always include other adult males, and they're most often comprised of several harems of 4 or 5 females headed by a dominant male. Now, a funny thing often happens with baboons. Sometimes a subordinate male will favor a particular female who belongs to someone else's harem. And he'll give her lots of extra social grooming, and he'll share his food with her, and he'll help her with her juveniles, with her children. And she might return his expressed affections. But she can't go and enforce her choice of this other male on this much larger, stronger head of her harem. And so instead of doing that, which would just be doomed, what does she do? When she goes into heat and the dominant male begins to mate guard, and that basically means, I'm not going to let you out of my sight, she will lead him all over the place. Every time he sits down to rest, she will get up and go somewhere else. And then he'll have to follow her. And then he'll sit down to rest again, and she will get up and she will wander off somewhere else, and he will trail after her. And eventually, he'll get so exhausted that she can sneak away and, you guessed it, mate with that nice guy who has invested more in her and her offspring. Another tactic employed on the part of baboon females who want to be with someone else, who want to have their choice of mate, is that she will actually lead the dominant male past another dominant male in the troop, another head of harem, over and over again, just parading him in front of this other male, back and forth, until eventually the two of them will reach a point where they're going to have a confrontation, and she'll use that confrontation as a diversion to, you guessed it, sneak off and mate with that nice guy who invested more in her and her offspring. Now, this is essentially what that professor from the University of Tennessee suggests happened with our early hominid ancestors. And there are a few things that certainly support his conclusion, not least of which is our species' unique consensus that sex is something to be done in private, rather than out in the open without any care for who could be watching. If the first monogamous couples were actually people who were cheating on someone, and the price of getting caught cheating was getting your block knocked off, you're going to want some privacy. Humans are also unique in that we are egalitarian maters. And by egalitarian, I mean that all humans have the opportunity to pair bond and mate if they can manage it. There really aren't a whole lot of restrictions as to who's allowed to and who isn't, the way there are in most species of monogamous primates. And there are some significant reasons why the model of monogamous and egalitarian has been so successful for us humans. One wise biologist said once that I'd give my life for 2 brothers or 8 cousins. And there's really a lot of truth to that, in that the degree of relatedness is very much at play when it comes to things like how much you're willing to invest in another individual, how much you're willing to help or protect them, and how much you're willing to put up with from them. In the case of that quote, the biologist shares 4 times as many genes with his brothers than he does with his cousins, and is therefore 4 times as invested in their survival and well-being. This instinctive tendency has also been demonstrated in one study done, I don't know how long ago, that determined that fathers will invest more heavily in their children if those children physically resemble them. Now, in partially matriarchal or matrilineal societies like the Mosuo in China, the children of the lower classes are raised not by both parents, but by the mother and her family. Married couples don't live together, but have what are termed visiting marriages. And while the Mosuo seem to be relatively self-sufficient, they're isolated, and most villages don't even have electricity or running water. In addition, their social organization has been historically feudal, and married couples of the ruling class do indeed live together and employ parallel lines of patrilineal and matrilineal descent. It's been speculated that imposing a more matriarchal system on the serf class was a way for the ruling class to neutralize threats to their power. In other words, in the case of the Mosuo, matriarchy, the elimination of paternal investment in offspring and strong pair bonding between couples, was seen as a way to weaken the social organization of the serf class so that the elites could more easily maintain the power to subjugate them. Now, what seems clear from observations of other species with respect to the degree of relatedness and the degree of investment and cooperation in other individuals is that the male who will be the most invested in any given child is going to be that child's father. Degree of investment in each offspring will also often decrease the more children a male is capable of having. The male who has only a few will be more motivated to contribute and ensure that they all thrive, and each child will get a larger share of the father's resources and investment. Anthropologists have even gone so far as to speculate that the shift in human social organization to one of individual paternal investment was what led us to the conditions required for our leap forward in sentience and cognition. When everyone has to scavenge and scramble just to get by, getting by is often all they can do. The surplus of resources available when men became wholly invested in their own offspring, that was what gave everyone more time and energy to innovate, to learn, and to discover. So, right from the beginning, it was women who decided the course of human history and what the dominant model of our social organization would be. They decided it by rewarding the extra protection and provisioning of beta males, and evolution selected for that innovative model because it was the most successful, given the environment in which we lived. I can't state strongly enough my belief that the progress of human society, from hunter-gatherer to agrarian to industrial to post-industrial, has largely been built on the backs of those very beta males and their individual investment in their children. Without that, we'd probably have a lot more in common with our chimpanzee relatives than the 98% of our DNA that we share. So, how does this all circle back around to the question of sexism against women? Well, the monogamous egalitarian model of social organization is one built around the idea of provisioning and protection of women and children. Women are more successful at raising children if they have external provision and protection. And humanity prioritizes that requirement because the strongest reproductive model is the model that persists. The harsher the environment, the more swiftly the evolutionary losers are going to be displaced, annexed, or demolished by the winners, or simply fail all on their own. Now, up until an evolutionary eye blink ago, the prevailing conditions in which we existed were really different than now. Back before safe streets, a robust police force, safe, comfortable transportation, leisure time, higher life expectancies, lower infant and child mortality rates, abundant, safe, easy indoor jobs, high literacy rates, social security and old age pensions, social safety nets, paternity testing, child support enforcement, birth control, baby formula, regulated daycare, social security numbers and reliable birth and identity tracking, and a multitude of conveniences that took hours off of everyone's workday. Back before all of that, women with children were necessarily dependent on the willingness of individual men to take on the enormous burden of paternal responsibility, as well as the social burden of chivalry. And when you consider that laws like coverture took protection of women to such an extreme that in an era of dozens of capital crimes and debtors' prisons, a husband was held criminally culpable for his wife's actions and debts, this burden was all the more onerous. A husband's obligations in an era of dangerous, strenuous physical labor, zero regulation of workplace standards, no such thing as workers' compensation, and literacy rates of less than 20%, would have been extremely onerous to most men, and at the same time vital to the survival and success of women and their children. The only real power to enforce these obligations in the days of small government was the social pressure placed on men to take on that role. So,